Hey guys, before we get started, this is going to be the first video of a mini-series called Pokemon Legends, rightfully dubbed so as videos such as this one are inspired by the recent reveal of Pokemon Legends Arceus, which, if you've been living under a rock, is an open-world Pokemon game which takes place in the past as opposed to what we're used to with every game generally taking place in the Pokemon equivalent of modern times. The very idea of there being games outside of the norm like this doesn't sound super revolutionary at face value, but when you take into consideration that Game Freak is very well known for being extremely safe with how they go about making their games, and that the Pokemon Mythos is actually very deep, a rather interesting picture starts to paint itself. If these Legends games end up being a subcategory of the franchise, just like how they have sort of like remakes or Let's Go games, I think that we're going to be in for a wild ride. Anyway, with that being said, I do hope you guys enjoy. Our story takes place several years before the events of Pokemon Red and Blue. However, unlike Legends Arceus, this is still a more modern Kanto with gyms intact. It'll be with different leaders and younger versions of characters we know, but still a relatively comparable time. Now, the exact timeline of when these events take place is unknown, but given the access to gene splicing technology, as well as the involvement of a certain individual, we know that this at least takes place within the last few decades. Now, given the title of this video and the Pokemon in question, this game undoubtedly would revolve around both the capture and splicing of Mew and the conception of Mewtwo. That said, there is a lot of information that is both outright stated and implied through the video games and other Pokemon mediums, but we're going to mostly refer to the video games as, other than small nods and references, they are generally their own canon. Now, I could see several avenues in which this game could follow, however, I've chosen this specific one as it sort of relates to your character's role in Legends Arceus. I see the player acting as an assistant to, or actually being, a younger version of Oak, tasked with the aid of creating the Kanto region's first Pokedex, and you'll find yourself bumping heads with the Mewtwo creation process. Now, about that process, we actually have a lot of information given to us through the Cinnabar Mansion, the Pokedex, and through some other small nods to the creation of Mewtwo scattered throughout the games. But before we get into that, as for the gameplay loop, I see it acting as a sort of gym challenge, much like the regular Kanto games, but instead with the games being open world, allowing you to fight the gyms in any way you would like, and the Pokemon would scale based on total badges, much like they do in Pokemon Origins. I've always liked that idea, as it explains why characters like Brock will throw out a level 14 Onix, and it's like, how this guy become a gym leader. Once you start a new game, you'll be greeted with a small cutscene of a single scientist in a faraway jungle searching for something. After a short exposition, he'll come across Mew and capture it, perhaps even using unethical means, depending on how the story would play out. Think of something like the way the legendary birds were captured in Pokemon 2000. After this, your character will embark on their journey, and most of your time will be spent exploring the region, catching various Pokemon, and battling gyms, with different events pertaining to Mewtwo being scattered throughout the region. Now, before we continue, we have to take a look at what exactly happened regarding Mew and the creation of Mewtwo, and how this story could be fitted into a game setting. Alright, so the story of Mewtwo's creation and subsequently Mew's captivity and release back into the wild all surround one major character, that being Mr. Fuji, or as he was known in this time, Dr. Fuji. There are several examples of Fuji's involvement in the creation of Mewtwo from both the anime and Pokemon Origins. However, the games are a little more cryptic with his involvement, though heavily implied. For starters, Mr. Fuji has a history of studying Pokemon with Gym Leader Blaine, as noted by this picture in the Cinnabar Gym, and then in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, Blaine mentions that the Pokemon Mansion still holds the remnants of his old friend's research. This research obviously referencing the various journal entries found within the mansion. This is also where Fuji presumably had lived. July 5th, we discovered a new Pokemon deep within the jungle. July 10th, we christened the newly discovered Pokemon, Mew. This mansion also references the birth of Mewtwo in the following entries. February 6th, Mew gave birth. We named the newborn Mewtwo. September 1st, Mewtwo is far too powerful. We have failed to curb its vicious tendencies. Or if you prefer the Japanese translation, the Pokemon Mewtwo is far too powerful. It's no use. I cannot control it. All of this paints a pretty clear picture. Fuji discovered Mew deep within the jungle, which used to be South America, but was just later retconned to Faraway Island, captured it, and created Mewtwo from it. Now you might be wondering, it says Mew gave birth, and while yes, that's true, Mewtwo's Pokedex entry states the following. It was created by a scientist after years of horrific gene splicing and DNA engineering experiments. And a Pokemon created by recombing Mew's genes. It's said to have the most savage heart amongst Pokemon. So while the game states that Mew gave birth to Mewtwo, it was clearly conceived through reprehensible means. That said, these means are indicative of Mr. Fuji as a person, as a morally reprehensible individual. This isn't the same Fuji we see in Red and Blue, whom had retired and taken to saving abandoned Pokemon. This instead is a man who has yet to find his resolve, and for one reason or another has taken to committing egregious acts towards Mew and perhaps other Pokemon as well in the name of research. Now I can see Mr. Fuji as being the game's main antagonist, or perhaps being very integral to the antagonists as a whole. He could also perhaps work alongside Blaine, and I can see pretty interesting character arcs for both of them, which we will discuss now. Now there are several different ways in which I could see the game working out, but I find this the most interesting, and that has to do with Team Rocket's involvement in the making of Mewtwo. Now, in the anime as well as other various medias such as the TCG, Giovanni is depicted as having a large role in the creation and funding for the project. That said, specifically with the anime, we see a much younger Fuji as opposed to the old man we have now. The timeline in which Mewtwo was created is also heavily dependent on whether or not Giovanni and Rocket were involved, as Giovanni looks to be about 40 years old. Now that's absolutely not to say that a Giovanni in his 20s couldn't have perpetuated this, however it's a lot less believable when you assume that at that point he'd be a much less seasoned Rocket boss, as the organization itself would have been much less established than what it is in Red and Blue, and let's be honest, it's not very competent in that game either. This also depends on how old Mr. Fuji actually is, because anime and other mediums tend to have a really hard time depicting ages as well, so Fuji could be like 80 years old, or he could be in his 60s. So depending on both his and Giovanni's ages lining up in a believable way as they pertain to when Fuji retired and when Giovanni took the reins, they could perhaps have been in cahoots, and the game does imply that Giovanni at least knows of Mewtwo's existence through his actions. You've probably heard the fan theory about Giovanni being the good guy because he tries to get the Silph Scope to catch Ghost to fight Mewtwo and the Master Ball to capture it, and while this theory is cool and makes a lot of really good connections, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that he was a good guy. It could just mean that he was trying to capture Mewtwo for his own personal gain. This is further referenced with a successful Giovanni in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon possessing a Mewtwo. Anyways, all of this could tie into Team Rocket being the funding behind the project and working in tandem with Fuji and Blaine, or they could have forced them to do what they did. I do find the latter less likely because the original Japanese journals allude to Mr. Fuji working alone, and I think it would make for a much more interesting story arc if he did have a change of heart after. But if he were just absolutely working alone for a game setting, it would be quite boring because there'd be nobody to fight against. Now, Fuji's character arc is actually much more faceted than meets the eye when taking into consideration what exactly we have in game. Now, for starters, Mew's Pokemon Gold Pokedex entry reads, "Apparently it only appears to those people who are pure of heart and have a strong desire to see it." This alone seems contradictory at face value, given the fact that Fuji, someone whom clearly is willing to partake in morally inept behavior, was able to find Mew in the first place. This could mean one of two things. Either Fuji was in fact being forced, in which case he did have a pure heart, hence being able to find Mew in the first place, or at one time he was a good person, however he allowed his scientific ambitions to dwarf what once was his morality. Whichever way you slice it, the game would consist of the player character having various run-ins with either Team Rocket or whatever group is supporting Fuji and Blaine, and would ultimately culminate in what was the September 1st diary entry, in which Mewtwo can no longer be controlled and you would have to battle it as the player, and afterwards it would likely find its way to Cerulean Cave. The ensuing battle would end up destroying the Cinnabar Mansion, leaving it to the state that it is in Red and Blue, and Fuji would see the error in his ways, and perhaps we could see tension between him and Blaine, with Blaine leaving Fuji's side during the mid-game or even before game and starts acting as an A-tier character, or perhaps even an older rival of sorts, sort of like N. During the post-game, the player will meet up with Fuji and travel alongside him to Faraway Island to release Mew, at which point the two of you put up the sign as seen in Pokemon Emerald version. The sign reads as follows. The writing is fading as if it was written a long time ago. Burr, 6th day. If any human sets foot here again, let it be a kind-hearted person. With that hope, I depart. This perhaps is referencing the 6th day of September, 5 days following Mewtwo's destruction of the mansion. The Japanese version of this also ends with a signature which ends in G, as in J-I, as in the last 2 letters of Fuji, thus speculated to be Fuji's writing. I mean, who else would bring Mew back to where it was and put this sign up? Thus begins Fuji's redemption arc, returning Mew to whence it came in hopes that if one day someone were to find it, they truly would possess a pure heart. This would then follow by Fuji relocating to Lavender Town and residing there in order to take care of abandoned Pokemon in some sort of attempt to atone for his sins. So yeah guys, that's sort of the gist of what I could see Pokemon Legends Mew and Mewtwo going for. There's so much other lore that I haven't covered in this video that could also be worked into a Kanto Legends title, such as the war that Surge participated in, Agatha and Oak's rivalry / relationship when they were young, the birth of Team Rocket as it is, and more. I left this video sort of open-ended as I want to hear some of your guys' thoughts and ideas, and perhaps additions to this. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, and if you did enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. I cover a lot of monster taming content on this channel, so that includes Pokemon, but it also includes games like Temtem, Koromon, Monster Crown, Kindred Fates, Sky Climbers, etc. So if you're into the genre as a whole, definitely subscribe. I have more of these Legends videos planned and other Pokemon content as well as monster taming content as a whole. So you can also follow me on Twitter at GymLeaderEd. Check out our subscriber Discord. All links will be in the description. Until next time, peace.